don't cry like a girl. Be a boy, be tough. People grow up seeing abuse as a normal thing.
So when there's a repeated pattern of that suffering,
this is a trauma that I must face, that I must break.
Malbatt in this case is just like one piece of the whole UNIFIL mission.
Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Beyond the Headlines, the go-to space for the top stories that made the headlines and more. I'm Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Elena, Koshy.
And today we open the discourse with tragic news that shook many of us. A young mother and her daughter was found dead in their home in Kulim, Kedah, in what police suspect to be a murder-suicide. Now her 7-year-old son survived, injured but alive. Preliminary investigations, of course, revealed that the mother had been in deep emotional distress, possibly linked to a relationship dispute. Now, 2 handwritten notes were found, of course, one apologizing and the other expressing that she could not bear the pain.
But this tragedy isn't an isolated case. Sadly, many similar stories never make the news. So cases involving women in emotional or domestic crisis often goes unreported, hidden behind closed doors, dismissed as private matter or even a civil case. So when we hear about it, sometimes it's too late. When a life is taken or something happens, only then we hear it. So it seems like somewhere along the line, the system is broken.
And that is why we are here today. That's why we are exploring further in terms of what drives an individual to reach a certain breaking point and what warning signs should not be missed. And most importantly, how can we prevent from the next tragedy to happen? Our goal, of course, is not to speculate, but to understand and to create an empathetic sort of community and surrounding for the unseen that many face every day.
And with that, let us introduce our guest for today, All Women's Action Society, AWAM, Capacity Building Director, Jayamalar Samuel, and consultant psychologist, Katyana Azman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's begin by understanding what could bring somebody to such a devastating point. Katyana, from your psychological standpoint, how does emotional distress reach such an extreme level where a person feels so trapped that they feel like there's no way out?
I think the key word that you just said, which is trapped, right? And I think that when people feel extremely distressed, hopelessness tends to rear its head after a while when they feel like no matter what they try or what people say, things don't improve. So when there's a repeated pattern of that suffering, people often start to feel hopeless. Like, what's the point? Things are not going to get any better. And that creates the feeling of being backed into a corner or feeling quite trapped. And so when that is often the outcome, whether that be perceived or real, people will try to find a way to remove themselves from that situation. And unfortunately, if life or what they calculate to be their lives as being the reason why they feel that trapped, then the sad reality is that conversations such as this end up coming up.
Do you think it's also, what triggers this is actually situational sort of context, right? Because when a person is happy, they might not be in that particular zone. But when something happens, the environment changes, then they trigger to drive to the edge sorts. Or if a person has that sort of trait, it's always at the back of their mind.
So I think that a lot of people tend to think about, we hear cases about individuals who've taken their lives. They talk about how we never saw it coming. They had a lot going for them. They're very happy in these moments and they can reflect on recent events where they were smiling and making plans. So sometimes people think that suicide or thoughts of ending your life come with a long history of depression. And that's not always the case, especially with younger individuals, so teenagers and young adults. It often appears very impulsive. And the reality of it is because, yes, those who struggle with major depressive disorder are at a higher risk of, thinking about ending their lives and self-harm and all that. But then you also have people who might, in the grand scheme of things, have a lot going for them, but then they have, like you said, situational elements or components of their lives that just keep persisting in that way. And if they've perceived that there's just no way out or that there's no remedy to the situation.
Or loss of control.
Or loss of control, exactly. And they don't have elements in their lives that show them that they can overcome it and that they can get support, then this can be something that comes to mind, despite the fact that they might have pockets of happiness here and there.
So the next question is that what can families or those who are close to an individual look out for, the warning signs then, the red flags then, to intervene before something worse happens?
I think that always the self-talk starts to change. I think when individuals start looking at things from a very negative angle, they start being very negative about themselves, they talk in a very hopeless tone that there's just no point, like why do I bother? Changes in behavior, so no longer wanting to engage in things that they would normally be interested in. Personal hygiene might also change because, again, why bother with showering and putting makeup on and doing all that? So when you start to see sort of a lack of investment in life or a lot of discussion about what's the point and a lot of hopeless undertone, then that to me is a huge red flag that families should talk about. I do believe that we need to part away from this mindset that, oh, it's not my problem, or this is like a personal, like you mentioned earlier about, like, especially when it's a domestic issue, this is a matter between you and your partner. I don't have to get involved. I think we need to kind of recognize that we do have a responsibility to keep an eye out for each other, and if there's stuff that alarms us, we should be able to alert that individual or the ones around them. So looking for those subtle changes, I think, can be quite helpful.
Basically, it's like resignation from life in that sense.
Correct. Yeah.
But it's also an environmental thing as well, isn't it? To where the person is, and does that also play a role?
100%. So there's so much research going into, different demographics, different geographical locations, and how that impacts an individual's willingness to access or their ability to access support. So we do know that, yes, an individual's environment can have a very big influence on whether they feel comfortable reaching out, whether they have the funds, whether they have the access. So those things do definitely play into it as well.
I think from that, I would like to hear Awam's observations also, because how does emotional or psychological abuse impact a woman's decision making or even her sense of self-worth?
Okay. For us in AWAM, we do counseling under our Telenita telephone line. And in my working experience also for the last 20 years on issues on violence against women, we see women, as what said earlier, they feel trapped. All this violence that happens to them, especially domestic violence. Sometimes there are women also go through domestic violence from a very young age, whereby they see they're getting abused, or they see their mothers or sisters older than them getting abused. So it builds on them, whereby they lose their self-confidence. They doubt themselves, and where they couldn't come and get help. Even they want to get help. Sometimes we say, there is help here. Why don't you go and ask? But if you're continuously going through violence and abuse, or you are in a situation where you're very distressed, it's very difficult for them to go and seek help because they already have a lot of self-doubt in themselves. They feel they can't trust themselves and nobody will trust them. That is the one who leads them not wanting to help or continuously being trapped. So another reason is also because of the financial dependence, whereby women face situations where, because most of the time, especially women in the lower income category, there are times they have to leave their job when they have children. So they are financially dependent on their spouse or partner. So that also put them in a situation where when they go through such violence or a distress situation or abuse that happens, they are trapped in the sense that they can't go and get help because they really do not know how to help, how to find help, what will happen to them. So it's beyond their understanding or comprehension.
But in the context of say you're groomed to not love yourself, to not have the enough self-worth to even seek help or be daring enough to seek help, right? How do we fight this cultural conditioning that has been built over years, and how can somebody, just break that wall to just reach out,
I think the cultural conditioning starts from a very young age, even from the time a child is born. Because we do tell children, even now we do hear, don't cry like a girl, be a boy, be tough. Things like this we do say. We say it in a way that innocently, but it does affect a growing child. So, and then when a girl is grow up, even recently I was talking to someone whereby she finished her studies, a postgraduate, but the family is expecting her to get married, to settle down. So this kind of cultural conditioning where you need to get married, you need to settle down, you need to have a family, or you need to be obedient, you need to be submissive. All this conditioning happens to most people, especially women. So that kind of conditioning, when it happens, in the long run, even when you are in a difficult situation, you find trapped and you're not able to get help. Another way it happens also sometimes the way the religious, when sometimes religious conditioning is also a way, sometimes the interpretation where you have been told, this is the way life is, and this is how you have to handle. You shouldn't leave, you will break families. Sometimes culturally we have been told, this is a family matter, you must know how to handle it. So that kind of things, when people constantly hear, the women could think that this is how my life should be, I must do something. And then they end up feeling guilty that the reason they are in this situation is because of them. And they try to get help or do something by their own, and then there are times where they really find that they can't help themselves, and that could lead to this kind of situation.
But it's also interesting what you said earlier, just a few minutes earlier, when you talked about, the cycle of abuse, because they see their mothers getting abused, or, their sisters or whatever, so they grew up with it. And sometimes, do you think, I don't know whether maybe you might want to try that, do you think that people grow up seeing abuse as a normal thing, that it becomes normalized, so normalized in their lives that they feel that they're not sure whether it's abuse?
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we have seen a lot of, again, going back to a lot of studies looking at how abuse affects the development of a child, and very much so. The children learn about what is appropriate through the interactions of their caregivers. And so when a child grows up in a home where, abuse is how, dissatisfaction, disappointment, frustration, all these big feelings are dealt with, and that it is something that is very much normalized, they do start to, it does develop a concept in their brain that it is just typical. This is what happens when I drop the ball, when I'm a disappointment, when I've upset someone, this is what it's like. And then to take it another sort of step further, we also see girls who grow up in that environment believing that is a typical interaction between husband and wife, between partners. So it is more likely that they are going to gravitate, sadly, towards individuals who communicate and interact in that way, because they might see that that's how validation exists, that if a partner will be angry and physical because they care, they want me to improve, they want me to do all these things. So they almost understand love languages as being very much like that. So yeah, I think that what they see becomes what they believe is normal, what is typical.
So apart from just like being culturally conditioned on externally, internally, you're also doing that practice, right? But there have been instances whereby like you have individuals who understand that this is a trauma that I must face, that I must break. In that particular context, where do they reach out to? Because sometimes they don't know where to go, except for whoever they befriend, right? But sometimes the advice might not necessarily be the good advice. What sort of outlet should be the correct outlet? I don't know if that is even right to say one is correct, the other one is not too sure.
I mean, I think for me, I'm pretty sure Jay can also add to it, but I think for me, what I tell people is that speaking up about it in whatever forum is a good first step, because I think that culturally we've also been conditioned to not air your dirty laundry and don't talk about it outside of your marriage and your homes. And I think that when a person takes that step to speak about it to a peer, to speak about it to a colleague, that's already like a big step away from that conditioning. Yes, those people might not be the best, they might not be trained, and that's why I think us talking about it in these platforms educates people that, hey, if you have somebody who's coming to you and you recognize you don't have the experience experience or the know-how, be the one to say, hey, let me help you figure it out. Let me help connect you to services like what Jaya has described, or let me help you find a therapist. Because I think to say, oh, this is, I don't know what this is, it's not my experience, it's not my area, and you shut them down and you close that door, then they are going to have to revert back to, okay, well then maybe I shouldn't be talking about it. So I think that, just taking that step to recognize this is not good for me, this is a problem, this is not normal, and that I need to speak up about it and get a different opinion, is something that is already very powerful. And then of course there are all these infrastructures.
There are studies have shown, statistically, that boys were exposed to domestic violence, the chances of them becoming an abuser is very high. So and sometimes people have spoken, for the abuser, because why do you abuse your wife? They've also said that's how they see in their family, how that's how a man he should be. So there is exposure also impacts the children, especially boy child. And secondly, it's where do we go for help? There are various platforms. One is, I say, Telenita. There are also mental health support like Befrienders. So there are also organizations that provide such support. But the most important thing is, if you really want to reach out to the people, the marginalized people, those in the B40, the urban poor, the rural people, then it has to be in multiple languages, because Malaysia is a multicultural country.
Very diverse.
Yeah, it has diverse, and we have diverse needs, diverse understanding also. A person who how to say, someone in the village will understand different on the issue of domestic violence, or could be understanding how to get help differently from a person in the urban. Possibility is there. So I think having services that's at the community level is very important, because most of the time for a woman to walk out from her house to go and get a help, it takes a lot of time for her to think.
It's very daunting.
Yeah, it's daunting.
Yeah.
And especially if she has a small child, who's going to take care of a child? All these things. So it's always important the services is available in the language that she understands and she can able to communicate. And then it's nearby. That means in the community centers or in the government clinics, whereby such services is available so that they can go and get help. And it's also reasonable. It's free or it's reasonable in the sense that the services is provided to them.
Because cultural conditioning, as we talked about, it affects society. Because when you talk about depression, domestic violence and suicide, these are things that are often buried under the carpet. Like nobody wants to talk about it. Even us as society, we don't talk about it. We don't discuss things like this often enough. There's not enough dialogue to start the ball rolling and to make it less of a taboo subject, as opposed to something that needs to be discussed, and needs to be talked about. So in your opinion, how do we as society, how do we create an environment where things like this are not taboo subjects, are not things that should be buried under secrecy, or we don't talk about domestic violence, we don't talk about breakups and depression. How do we go about creating an environment like that?
Okay, I think we have to familiarize these languages, familiarize the topic, in the sense that speaking in the school, even speaking in the teachers training, teachers training colleges, because teachers are the one who handle children, giving teachers that kind of education to understand these kind of issues, because so that they can pick it up from in schools and help the children to address it, because most of the time mothers who go through abuse, it also affects the children, and also send public places, posters, awareness topics. All these issues has to be spoken openly so that people constantly hear about it and know, and also not only talking in the sense of creating awareness on this issue, but also where can you get help. So that is very important, and being available in the languages they understand. And also faith-based organizations. Most people go to temple, church, mosque for prayers. Most of the time they also go with the family. These are also platforms where people need to speak about it. And there are some religious places where they also have counseling. They make counseling available. So they might have such topics to be covered, I think, but more. in the sense that people know these are the places they can get help. That's very important. And also sensitizing frontliners. The frontliners, the nurses, the doctors, the police, the welfare, they all know the issue. It's not they do not know sometimes, but constant giving sensitization is very important, and being available for service providers, because constantly providing service, providing counseling, they also get burnout. So it's being there, giving them the support. That's very important. Another thing is very important is providing shelter, because if a woman knows that if she leaves a house with a child, there is a shelter that she could go, that she could be there temporarily until she get her help, I think that is also very, very important.
Right.
Yeah.
No, because we're talking about how we can actually instill long-term efforts, right? That actually sustains, and not just you speak about it overnight. You have good intervention programs, but eventually there's not a lot of take-up, meaning there's not a lot of participation from the individuals who are actually facing these issues, right? Suffering in silence. And when we talk about that, right, I do want to highlight this. Like, for instance, they have been clinically diagnosed to have mental stress or to be suffering from a certain sort of condition. What is the responsibility of the people around them to ensure that this individual is not risking the lives of the people they surround themselves with? For instance, in the case of Kulim, it's not just the mother who lost her life, the children too. I mean, just one child, but the plan was for both of them to, follow the same fate, allegedly, right? But in this particular case, one survived, and then the implications of that son, how they're going to grow up,
The trauma.
So in that particular context, right, when you know already you are clinically diagnosed with something, what's the community's responsibility to ensure that there's a safety net around this individual so that such situation won't happen?
I think this is a very tricky question to answer, because at the same time, we also do not want to continue the narrative that having a mental illness means that you need to be babysat, right? Or that you can't be independent and that you need to constantly be monitored. Because I think that is ultimately what feeds into the fear that surrounds mental illness, is that they are a risk to people. And yes, there are, I think, individuals who are at higher risk. And I think that is where it falls upon the responsibility of family members to just always touch base and always, without I need to monitor and babysit, but rather always keeping channels of communication open, always kind of asking, hey, how are things going? How's therapy going? Being kind of there to show these individuals that their support system isn't just potentially their therapist or whoever they're seeing, if that's something that they're accessing, but knowing that it is possible for them to lean on the people around them, so that when things do reach a peak, they do know that they can reach out to those in their sphere. But at the same time, we want them to know that, again, why I say it's tricky, because we don't want to perpetuate the idea that they can't be trusted with their children, that they can't be trusted with having jobs and things like that. So I think we have to be very focused on having them recognize that those supports are available, that conversation is welcome, that and I think going back to what Jaya said, I think the more that we familiarize people with these topics, it gives people a sense of community. And I think that is what mental illness does, is that it makes you feel like you're very isolated. And because you are alone, no one can save you, no one can help you. And that's when, thoughts of self-harm and suicidal ideation, they love that kind of environment, that kind of narrative. So I think that what we want to do is to talk about it often. Like, I applaud a lot of people who have shared on social media or who have spoken about it publicly, how they have experience with abuse, how they have their journeys, because I think that it allows people to go, oh my gosh, this is not just me, like this is something that other people go through, and that I can talk about it without judgment, that there is a support system in place, there are shelters, there are options, right? Because I think that it's very easy for them to feel like I can't do it. I'm the only person on earth who's going through this. I have to figure it out because no one's going to help me. And so I think that kind of that needs to be where it is. So checking in on the people around you, opening up that conversation so that they feel that, you know, they're not being judged and that they're not being prosecuted for that. And, you know, like Jaya said, it is a very difficult thing for people to do, to be able to admit that you think about it, to be able to admit that I have reached a point where I don't think my life is worth living. That's a very hard thing for people to say. And unfortunately, I've seen it more often than not where people hit back with, hey, don't say that. You can't say that. Think of your children. Dosa.
So do you think that is actually gaslighting?
In a way, I don't think it's the intention.
Okay.
I don't think the intention is to gaslight, but I think that it is something that is so uncomfortable for people to hear because they don't know what to say. They feel like this individual's life is in their hands because what if I say the wrong thing, they're going to go and do it. That's something I hear a lot of people say.
But
so,
if I don't say something, it's also a problem.
Correct. So they
how
kind
do-
of, so they kind of panic and they kind of fall back on the don't think about it. You know, it's a sin. You know, your religion says otherwise. Yeah.
I mean, it's also a case of cultural conditioning, because, you know, we are taught and we are raised, we must think about the children.
Yes.
It's not about you anymore.
Yes.
It's about the children. So, you know, what's your depression compared to raising your children? But also, I can't help but notice that, you know, help is at hand when you're in an urban setting. As opposed to a place like Kulim. I mean, I'm not saying that it's so rural, but it's a smaller town where, you know, I'm not sure whether the same amount of help that is available here is available in little towns like this,
Correct.
where people who are going through things might feel a lot more isolated and feel a lot more alone.
Yeah.
Because everybody is going through something.
No, because okay, apart from the emotional neglect, we do want to highlight about, you know, the economic sort of like disparities and hardships actually do stop somebody from having access to proper help, right? And I believe AWAM knows about this as well. Like you speak to women who sometimes reach out when they don't have anyone. So in this particular context as well, right? Like how can the system be reaching to these parts
I mean,
of the targeted audience? I mean, I'm not saying
accessibility, because I think sometimes that's the case where people, you know, I mean, I can be in the heart of Bangsa and I've got all these places that I can go to, and you know, and also awareness is a lot more evident in an urban setting as opposed to a rural setting when you're going through a lot of things and you feel isolated.
and we're not even talking about the cost yet.
I mean, therapy is expensive. So, you know, that's all the factors that I feel, you know, should be made readily available. But maybe, you know, what are your thoughts, Jay, on this?
I think it's a very good question in the sense that one thing I would like to add on, besides saying it's a family matter, it's also family name, honor. So that's why, you know, I'm from this so and so family. How can I go out and complain about my family, my husband, or my in-laws? So that's why sometimes, most cases, people don't come out. But the most important is making the services available, as I said earlier. There are various platforms that we could use, you know, like at most places, even in rural area, there is Adun, you know, there is neighborhood watch, you know, Penghulu, you know. So there are places where all these people need to be exposed, you know, at their capacity, tailored programs for them to understand, because they are very close to their neighbors, they are very close to their village people. So they should be able to be trained, you know, and how to identify, pick up. If there is if they hear violence happening in their neighborhood, you know, they have the authority as the Penghulu or as the leader of the community to go and speak and to find out, you know, and they have been trained on this. So there are, in that way, so we can train people on community leaders, you know, to understand, and also religious leaders can be trained. Schools, even you are in a rural area, you have schools, and there are school counselors. So people also the school counselors can be also be trained on issues on how to identify such distress, because the children do come to school and sometimes they do carry, and the Parents Teachers Association. So I think if we look at it from that way, there are neighborhood, there are communities where we can create awareness. We can put places where people can go for help. Even the primary help, the first stage of help is very important. Where a person feels even at the first stage, I can't go and get any help because they've gone through so much of trauma and so much of distress in them that they feel they're self-doubting, they feel that's my life, I don't have anywhere to go. That's when a worse scenario might happen.
The scenarios will happen usually when you have an individual who is an overthinker and who fears being judged, right? But that is something that everybody fears, the judgment, because sometimes maybe certain communities would judge to the extent of ostracizing an individual entirely, like you can't come here anymore because if you come here then something bad will happen, like literally physically, or
But I also think, right, I mean, when you say that village heads needs to be trained, we need a lot more trained school counselors. It literally takes a village, and we need to look out for each other at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah.
Because we can't rely just on, expert help. And I mean, from the gist of what you're saying, because I think, village heads, aduns, even your, people, your neighbors, for example. So I think we all need some form of training in order to help people, I think, because it takes a village to care for one another.
Training. Yeah, training. Even before training, awareness.
Right.
Knowing that if there is a sound, if something happening in a fight, it's not like it's none of my business or something is happening. That kind of awareness, it could be abuse. Children are crying, a woman is crying, so let's go and help. If you fear of going and help, maybe you can go to your penghulu and say, in this number, how something is happening, can we go and check it out? So I think training is good, especially for leaders and everyone, even in counselors, but awareness that it is not a personal issue, it is a community, and we as a community should help each other.
Kepekaan lah. Being peka one another. We have like less than 5 minutes, but I do want to understand this as well, because this is also very important for survivors, right? What sort of like long-term sort of like therapy needs to be put in place to ensure that the upbringing of the individual who faced such an incident, in the case of Kulim, let's say the boy growing up, to not have repetitive patterns that he survived from.
Since I found out about the news, my heart has gone out to this little boy, because I keep thinking about just how this incident is going to affect him throughout the rest of his life in very different ways, right? Because as we evolve, as we grow and we become different people, it's going to affect him now as a child. It will likely affect him when he gets his first partner. It's going to affect him when he becomes a father, if that's the path. At different stages of his life, this incident is going to inform how he views it. So I would say to look at it as a lifelong thing. Not that he's going to be in therapy lifelong, but rather that it is something that you have to be prepared to support an individual however they need for the rest of their life, because it will evolve, it will morph throughout his lifespan. And so when I think about how, if say in 5 years from now, if it comes up and it affects him as a teenager and he has questions, I hope that the people around him don't go, but this is such a long time ago, why does it bother you? Or this is something yang in bahasa yang lepas, yang dah jadi tu jadilah, that type of mindset. I think I hope that that's not something that he has to face. And I think anyone who's survived something like this, that we recognize that it will come up and affect you, especially. And the thing that we know in psychology is that trauma is a very unpredictable beast, and it will affect people in very, very different ways and at very, very different times. And so to kind of confine ourselves to that, we need to only support this individual in a set way for a set duration, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So I think to be able to, so the people who are involved in this child's life, I would say be prepared for the fact that he will probably have questions and thoughts and feelings that come up throughout his lifespan, and you should meet him at that level as these questions and these feelings come up. Because, I think, and even the clients that I've worked with, they might come and deal with it when it's very acute, but I tell them, like, look, you're feeling better, that's great, but my door will always remain open for you for as long as I'm around. So if you come back in 5 years, I will be here in 5 years for us to talk about it. There's no expiration date to what you're feeling. So I think that is what I hope anyone who has survived something like this will give themselves the grace to, that it will come up and there's no expiration date, there's no limit, there's no need to get over it just because other people are fine or you are older or whatever limitations that society has put on you. There's no such thing. I think that's what I would like there to be. Yeah.
I mean, aside from awareness, right, we also need real systems of care that don't fail women, especially, well, I think not just women, I think even men and
too, yeah.
children too, right? I mean, every individual, that don't fail us when we reach out, So to close our segment, right, let's talk about prevention, if there's even that. How can families and friends intervene early? How can we, as society perhaps, intervene early if we notice someone withdrawing or experiencing or expressing despair?
But maybe the first sort of trait to do,
Yeah.
what to say, what not to say.
I think the most important is listen. Listen with empathy. I think that's very important because there are clues the woman or the child gives, in a very subtle way. To being observant and listening is very important. And also sometimes I've also seen cases, heard stories whereby the working colleague, when they see abuses in the hands and things like that, rather than going asking what happened, they just take the domestic violence pamphlet and just leave it on the table, like in a very subtle way.
Yeah.
Because I think it takes time for anyone to open up. But showing the person that you are there, that's very important. And we know that if you can't be there, I think it's good to point out where to go for help. And building a community support, I think that is a very important thing, especially in the religious places, where always being there for showing them that it's not only praying but also addressing this kind of things and being aware, so that people can come for help.
Those are like simple things that can be done.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? And applied to any given situation, right?
Yeah.
Any age as well. Katyana, maybe because you're in this line having to deal with patients coming to you daily. Are there any sort of reforms that you like to see, especially when it comes to having to make spaces safe for our children? And when I say children, it's within the context of everyone, because the old ones were children once, right? The ones that are going through trauma today at a later age were once a child themselves.
Yep.
They face their own traumas.
Yeah.
They are shaped, they are nurtured in such a way.
Yeah.
So
I think exactly what Jaya said is that it's something that starts from a very, very young age, and I think that when we have to catch it when they're in adulthood and try to change their narratives, it's oftentimes a lot harder. And so to be able to start it from a young age, to be in schools, even in a preschool level, teaching children about how to articulate when they're not comfortable about things. Those are things that we need to start as early as possible, making it accessible by way of having all of their usual infrastructures and environments be very, maybe not even like super trained and well-versed, but just who understand that these things exist so that it becomes the norm, right? And I think what I would love to see change is, and this is the thing that I've thought about, which I find quite funny, is that Asians are a community-based, system. We are supposed to care about the collective rather than the individual, right? That's something that we often say about Asian sort of programming or how we work. And yet when it comes to this, we become so individualistic in
Very
the sense
rigid.
that, very like, it's not my problem, it's you. And so I kind of want to see that change, right? I think that the saying "it takes a village to raise a child" is true. Speaking from experience, it is true. And so I think that we need to be able to protect our children, right? And like you very rightly said, adults were kids too. So often we focus on the survivors. I don't want to call them victims, but the survivors of domestic abuse and of abuse in general. We spare very little thought to the person who does the abusing, and think about how they got there, right? So like, how is it that you have gotten to this space? And I'm not saying give them, a slap on the wrist and ignore it, but I think recognizing that this started somewhere.
A cycle of abuse.
A cycle of abuse, and correcting that, right? So I think moms, dads, who's going through it, and I want to say, just to your point earlier, we do know that men do struggle to open up about this a lot more because they feel, I'm the man, I shouldn't be in this position. So male mental health is a really big thing now because we're recognizing that there's a gap there. But to go back to the point, I think what I would definitely like to see change is just a little bit more community, a little bit more of us looking out for each other's children. Listening is something we can all do, and you'll be surprised by how much that can change someone's life.
Right.
Don't feel like you have to know how to fix something before you can have that conversation. Just being a listening ear and having these individuals recognize that they're not, again, alone.
They're being heard.
Right.
They're being heard.
That makes a difference.
Yes, because the danger is when you feel alone, and then when you try to talk about it to the people in your community, they perpetuate that belief. So you feel like, oh, memang it's just me who's feeling this way. Everybody else is telling me to just be silent and tolerate and everything. Everyone is speaking the same language, and I'm here feeling like there's something wrong. Clearly, it must be a me problem, right? So I think that needs to change.
That needs to change,
Yeah.
and of course, in the context of like how communities needs to change, we cannot overlook the silent cries for help as well. And before we truly end this particular segment, I do want you to reach out to the hotlines that will be appearing either below the screen or right after our segment ends during the break. Because if you or you know someone who is struggling, do know that help is available. And with that, I'd like to thank our guests here on set. First up, of course, Katyana Azman, clinical psychologist. Thank you so much for being on Beyond the Headlines and sharing your experiences on this particular topic.
And also All Women Action Society, AWAM Capacity Building Director Jayamalar Samuel. Thank you so much for being here and for also lending your expertise to the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. And to our audience, don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our second segment. Welcome back, everybody. Now, Malaysia's role in global peacekeeping has long been a source of national pride. Of course, for nearly 2 decades, Malaysian troops have served under the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, also known as UNIFIL, standing as symbols of discipline, compassion, and dedication far from home. But of course, this particular week marks a turning point, right, Elena?
That's right. The first group of Malaysian Battalion 85013, the final deployment to Lebanon, has officially departed from Subang Air Base. So joining us today is Fuad Nizam, NST reporter, who was there to witness the send-off ceremony to talk about what this final deployment means for Malaysia's armed forces and the legacy our peacekeepers leave behind. So Fuad, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Lola. It's a pleasure for me to be on the show.
It's great to always see your face here back on set, Fuad. Of course, we want to start the discussion in terms of what you saw that day. What were the atmosphere like, and especially when you saw some families sending off their members, right? Their loved ones off to Lebanon?
Well, I think it's not some. I think all of the family members were there for the 500 or so members of the mission this time. So it was a mixture of emotions there. There's a sense of pride and also a sense of sadness because, these family members would see their loved ones for another full year before they could see their loved ones. And also the sense of pride in a way is that because it's the Malaysian spirit, going to Lebanon and assisting the people there
of course, we understand that this particular send-off marks the final deployment,
Yeah.
right, under UNIFIL, because Malaysia's gradual withdrawal is set for 2027, if I'm not mistaken.
That's not long off, actually.
Yeah, that's not long ago. But in terms of being there at that particular event, and of course the Armed Forces Chief, it was also there. What do you think he said about the transition, and why now?
Well, to take into perspective, the UNIFIL mission in Lebanon was established back in 1978 due to conflicts between Israel and Lebanon. So that's a lot to unpack. But through this UNIFIL mission, which was set then by the United Nations Security Council, or UNSC, this mandate has been refreshed every year. So every year the new mandate comes out, and they say, okay, you guys would stay another year or another year. So back in August 28, they decided that this particular mission would be only extended until December 31st, and where they would then initiate an orderly drawdown of the mission throughout 2027.
Right. But then, of course, like a lot of people were with the impression that we're going to be there forever, right? But of course, that's not the case. And the one who sets the decision is not necessarily from the Malaysian side as well. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, because Malaysia, or Malbatt in this case, is just like one piece of the whole UNIFIL mission. There is the Irish Malbatt, which is the Irish and Polish battalion. We also have our neighbor Indonesia, where it is one of the largest contingents there. So all these countries who pledge to be under UNIFIL, to serve under UNIFIL, they have their own posts or areas of command throughout the southern Lebanon area.
Right. But it's also something very quite emotional that I think General Nizam did mention as well. He did say it's time for Malaysia to pass, the responsibility of defending Lebanon to its own people in that sense. So in this particular observation, did this feel like a symbolic closure to you, or is it more of like a strategic decision tied to whatever UN has been aspiring to do?
Well, it's actually part of the UNIFIL mission, which is to actually build capacity for the Lebanese Armed Forces, or the LAF. So UNIFIL, our men who goes down there to Lebanon for deployment, does not actually just maintain peace and conduct civil-military cooperation or CIMIC activities, but also help with the local armed forces to build their capacities, whereby they would engage in training, and also missions such as unexploded ordnance removal, which is like artillery pieces which were...
So there were like shared knowledge transfers as well in that sense.
Correct.
I see. To bulk up the forces in Lebanon itself.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
It's like a capacity building mission as well, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, Malaysians' participation in Lebanon has always been a point of pride, especially given the recognition our peacekeepers receive for integrity and discipline. Can you share some examples or moments from past deployments that highlight Malaysia's contribution to peacekeeping efforts?
Well, I think at the top of my head, covering defense for the past year, there's a few, I could say, highlights of our Malaysian troops deployments there. In fact, most recently, if I'm not mistaken, there was a forest fire, and our men there noticed the fire during one of their observation points, and they also helped extinguish along with the local authorities. So this is some of the missions that our men had to deal with. They also help with, local programs, CIMIC programs, civil military cooperation, where they would go down with the local community, have talks. Sometimes they would, if I'm not mistaken, they would have like general medical services, for the villages or the people in the community who has any issues. They would provide doctors, and conduct health screenings.
When you were down at the tarmac yesterday, November 5th, right? Did any of the troops mention anything when you spoke to them about like what they hope for when they're there?
Well, I spoke to the commander. In fact, he was proud to be leading this particular mission, and he himself was particularly having this bittersweet feeling of being the last Malbatt commander for UNIFIL. Yeah. So he did say that he wanted to always make sure that, his troops are at the best possible, readiness to assist, to help with the people there. And also he said that he was, ready to carry on the mission that Malbatt 85012 had brought before, which is basically carrying the good name of the country.
No, because the only reason why I asked that, because of course when it comes to the mission in UNIFIL itself, 2027 will mark the ending, right? But we are also, talks have been out there in terms of us being ready to enter Gaza. And of course, you spoke with our armed forces chief as well, and he hinted that the Malaysian forces again is ready and preparing several operational options. So in what capacity first? I want to understand that. And in your point of view, right, do you think that it's a sign of readiness for Malaysia, or there's still room for discussion and consideration?
Well, General Nizam had previously said this time and time again. We are ready. We heed the call by the Prime Minister, Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, that we have a battalion ready should the possible Gaza mission be green-lighted. So yesterday, General Nizam said, if I may, he said discussions are ongoing with, final decision depending on of the deployment to be finalized by the end of the year, if the situation in the region and the mandate has been granted by the United Nations Security Council or other agencies. So from there, he said that they have outlined several options,
Right.
Whether they would send a mechanized unit. Mechanized unit is actually a mixture of troops and also vehicles, usually armored vehicles, and also or a mixed contingent comprising of logistics and medical elements.
Okay. But did he mention in terms of the volume? Because I do understand that Indonesia has expressed that it's ready to send about 20,000 troops to Gaza itself, right? But for us, would that be a scale that we're able to provide as well? But and what's the mission specifically? I mean, apart from just peacekeeping.
Well, General Nizam did not say that in particular, but when we talk about peacekeeping operations, sometimes volume does not matter.
Okay.
But when we put together, a few countries, all of this grows into a bigger force working under one flag or one common mission. So usually, depending on environment or developments, it would be usually medical care, dealing with the communities, and also at the same time keeping armed conflicts at bay. So that's the particular role of our peacekeeping operations.
I mean, aid has always been the bigger question in terms of how to disperse evenly and across Gaza, right? Because that's the main concern for now, and then rebuilding it is a second thing. But it's nice to know that we're sending not just a one-dimensional sort of like approach there. There's multitude of factors at play. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like for Malaysia, peacekeeping operations is always been our pride. Not just with Malbatt, we also went to Somalia, where we actually helped the US soldiers during the Black Hawk Down incident. We also deployed our team to Timor-Leste, our newest members, under Operation Astute with Australia. And also, most recently, we had also sent our troops, some, to Thailand and Cambodia for their border conflict under the ASEAN Observers Team.
Yeah, and that's set to take place for yearly, right? That's until.
Well, the AOT has been ongoing since they signed the Kuala Lumpur Peace Accord, even in fact previously, because General Nizam himself had went there and discussed and also took ground readings of the situation in Thailand and Cambodia.
Because based on what you've just told us, I mean, for somebody who is followed defense and regional security stories, I mean, we don't call you defense reporter for nothing. How significant is Malaysia's long-standing identity as a peacekeeping nation? You know, and what message does this transition, I mean, from Lebanon to potentially Gaza, says about Malaysia's global role?
Well, I think Malaysia has positioned itself, especially the armed forces, as a credible peacekeeping partner, if I may say, to the UN and also to its regional counterpart, because it says that we are serious in actually wanting to maintain peace and also prosperity, not just with its regional counterparts, but also those outside the region.
Just one last question from me. I just want to understand if General Nizam said anything about, like psychological readiness of the troops before entering Gaza, if we were to start entering Gaza.
Well, he did not specifically mention anything about mental or preparations and whatnot. But for our troops, we take the Malbatt, for example. They underwent force integration trainings in Port Dickson, which is around 3 months. They were taken from each of the service and then joined together there, where they attend courses, psychological courses, cultural courses, where they have to learn and understand, local cultures. So all of those are actually we have it under our armed forces, which is under the Malaysian Peacekeeping Center in Port Dickson.
Okay. So, I mean, training-wise, they're all good.
Yeah.
We're actually ready and good to go.
In fact, yesterday I interviewed one of the sergeants, a female sergeant. This was her second deployment. She said she was mentally prepared for, her mission to Lebanon. She first went to Lebanon back in 2019 under Malbatt 7.
I'm sure the same considerations will be given if we were to go to Gaza as well.
Yep. Because, the Malaysian Peacekeeping Center is there. General Nizam did say that despite the drawing down of the Malbatt mission, the Peacekeeping Center would still remain relevant.
Yeah. Will still remain in operation.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I do understand. I mean, from the emotional farewell of our last battalion to be going to Lebanon and knowing that that's the last team before our withdrawal in 2027, and of course having to keep alive Malaysia's peacekeeping legacy through the potential sending off of our troops into Gaza. I think that's one sort of like event that we're looking forward to. But hearing the stories, not just from the reports, but directly from you, is definitely, for me, another level of understanding the magnitude of the current scenario that we're facing right now. And I do want to say that a lot of people might not necessarily understand why Malaysia has this sort of pride when it comes to pushing for peace, but it goes back to whatever Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim did mention, especially during ASEAN. Our centrality and neutrality is what puts us on the map. Instead of further exacerbating situations in war-torn regions, we're actually ready to be broking peace.
That's something to be proud of.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
really something to be proud of.
Yes.
Right. Thank you so much again, Fuad.
All right, you're welcome.
And thank you so much as well, Elena, for being on the show.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure.
Unfortunately, this is the end of this episode. If you do like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell. If you haven't already, you'll not only get NSC Beyond the Headlines update, other NSC Online's news reports will be delivered to you. Of course, if you are on Instagram, X, TikTok, as well as Threads, as well as, did I mention TikTok?
Yes, you did.
I did, right? Okay. Yes, do follow us. NSC Online will be there sharing everything. My name is Amalina Kamal, and I'll see you next week.